Sounds good. So yeah, if y'all want to stay on the people mover, I know it's been a long day. No worries. I do have my mic here this time, so hopefully you can all hear me all right. Okay, so my name's Christian Hansen. I go by Chris. I work for John Deere on the engineering side of things. So I don't work for a dealership. I do work with the engineers, and I'm actually an agronomist by trade. So a few years back, John Deere started to make an investment into an agronomy department. Solely because we're starting to realize that equipment's getting really big, and adding more horsepower, adding more logistics and capabilities to those machines is still important, but it can only get so big. So we're starting to look back at some of our innovations, and we're going, how can we add additional value to our equipment? And the number one answer that constantly comes up is agronomy. So my job as the agronomist with John Deere, I work for the small grains innovation team. So I'm primarily working with wheat, I'm working with canola, barley, all of the small grains crops. I don't have a focus on corn and soybeans. We do have separate teams for things like that, but it allows me to kind of focus in on those key crops and to deliver solutions that are focused on those key crops for Western Canada, northern plains of the U.S., central plains of the U.S., and then I also support Australia. But don't ask me any questions over there because I've never been. So so our teams are focused on those key crops. And so I've been in this role with Deere for about 3 years. Prior to that, I did have some experience working with Monsanto. Kind of cut my teeth in small plot research. Learned what's a treatment, what's a replication, how to do good trials. And as I transitioned, as Monsanto got bought by Bayer, I started to add more of a chemistry background. So I do have experience on that side of things. And then when Deere called me up 3 years ago and told me they were looking for an agronomist, I love equipment, I love technology, and I love implementing that stuff into Western Canadian agriculture. So I kind of snapped this up as a really awesome opportunity. So the rest is kind of history from there. Our current strategy, like I mentioned, is to focus on delivering value. So I work with obviously the sprayer production system team. So we have factories that build combines, tractors, sprayers. I work with all the product families. So I don't work exclusively with sprayers, although that has been a large focus for us just because of the implementation of a new product called See and Spray. You might have heard of it. Just a brief history of See and Spray and where that's come from within Deere. So back in 2016, John Deere started the process of working with the University of Southern Queensland in Australia, and that spawned what is behind me is known as See and Spray Select. So See and Spray Select is a what we call a green on brown solution. So it's capable of spraying weeds or green weeds on a black or a brown background. So if you think about it from a small grains perspective, that's really your pre-emergent passes, post-harvest, or in the case where you're actually doing real chem fallow, this system would be utilized in those scenarios. We have another system that is implemented by another team called Blue River Technologies. It's a company we bought in 2018, and they're located in California. And they are focused on our other See and Spray technologies called See and Spray Premium and See and Spray Ultimate. So the main takeaway is that the hardware and how we run these machines is very different between the two systems. So I am going to get into a little bit more detail on how each of them works and some of the advantages and disadvantages of both of the systems and what they're currently capable of. But just kind of level setting that this See and Spray Select is really spawned from John Deere internal engineering. And the premium and ultimate systems are really worked on by the Blue River Technology Group, like I said, that we acquired back in 2017. Okay, so the first thing I want to just talk through is what is targeted broadcast. So you'll notice that I use the term targeted broadcast instead of the terminology of spot spraying. So we hear a lot of farmers say spot spray. What is spot spraying? Well, if you actually look at a label, and some of these exist in Australia today, spot spraying is when I load up a backpack sprayer or a pump sprayer and I go spray my lawn or I go spray my driveway. So there's a very specific label that exists for those applications today, and we want to try and get away from that rhetoric because we don't want farmers to get confused. What we're doing with this big sprayer is the same thing as what you're doing on your lawn. So we're starting to refer to technology like this as either targeted broadcast or I can't remember the other term right now, but yeah, the term that I'm going to use for today's purposes is targeted broadcast. You might catch me still saying spot spray every once in a while. I use that when I talk with farmers because they usually see this tech and they go, well, that's a spot sprayer, right? Or an optical spot sprayer or something of the like, and they kind of akin that to that. So if you hear me say targeted broadcast, just understand that I'm talking about when we go to a field and we're spraying either weeds, we're spraying things like insects, possibly, identifying, crop that's nutrient deficient, potentially, disease pressure. There's all sorts of things that we can do with a targeted broadcast, but it's any situation where we're not doing a broadcast application. We're going out and we're treating those areas differently based on some sort of factor that's in the field. Okay, so the next thing, so I mentioned the two sort of application styles, so green on brown and green on green. So again, going back to green on brown, that's any situation where we have a background that isn't green, and we're spraying those individual weeds. And then the green on green is when we have a target crop in the background, and we're spraying out something that is within the crop. So with the See and Spray Ultimate machine and the premium machines today, we do have models available for corn, soybeans, and cotton. So what that means is that we can pull into those fields and the model is able to identify this is the crop and this is a weed, and we're able to selectively apply to those weeds and obviously spray throughout the field that way. So I'm going to go into a little bit about how the different systems work. So starting with Select, and I really hate PowerPoint because I look at it every day, so I'm going to try something new here today with drawing. I'm terrible at drawing, but just bear with me. So what we have with the Select system is we have a weed in the field. This is a broadleaf weed if you can't tell, or it could potentially be a grass weed. Doesn't really matter. And then we also have other things in the field. So we have soil around the weed. Or we might have, and I'm just going to use blue because I couldn't find another color. We might have, crop residue. So, we might have, cereal stubble, canola stubble. It doesn't really matter. So the Select system uses something called pixel classification to look at the image, and it looks for a spectrum of green. And I'll get a little bit into what the spectrum of green actually means in just a second. But for the purpose of right now, what you need to understand is it looks at this image and it goes, okay, hey, I'm seeing green in the middle of there, and that is big enough for me to spray. Therefore, I'm going to send a message to the nozzle to turn the nozzle on, and we're going to spray this weed. Now, the one thing with the systems is that we do have different sensitivity levels. So what the sensitivities do is they target a specific amount of pixels within the image. So if I had another weed over here, and we have 5 different sensitivity levels, so and 5 being the most sensitive, if I had it set at, say, like a 1, what that means is that sprayer is going to spray anything that is 500 pixels within the image or larger, and they have to be within a group. So there has to be kind of a green blob that is 500 pixels big in order for that sprayer to spray at sensitivity 1. If this weed over here was, say, 400 pixels large, it would not spray this weed because it's not big enough for the system to trigger. So in that scenario, I would need to turn my sensitivity up, and going from, say, like a 1 to a 2, now the weeds need to be 400 pixels or bigger. And then eventually, when we get to sensitivity 5, we go all the way down to 10 pixels. So we are spraying down to, basically a 1/4 inch size weed with confidence. Now, with that sensitivity setting, however, comes some different challenges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the system kind of segregates things. So if you're familiar with the primary colors of blue, green, and red, so we basically got blue, we've got green, and then we've got red. How the system works today on Select is it is looking for anything that is within this green spectrum, okay? So the one thing that sorry, I should back up. So basically it's going to spray, this is like a true green color. On this side here, as we start to get more towards red, this is kind of our lime greens. As you start to add more red, that's the color that it's going to change. And then as we start to move towards blue, that's going to be more of like your dark greens or your forest greens. So anything within this green spectrum gets sprayed. Where it gets a little bit complicated is when we start to overlap right into the red realm. So in this scenario here, where we get green mixing with red, now we start to see yellow, or what we as humans would perceive as yellow, and that would also get sprayed. And on the other side, as we start to get mixed into here, we start to get like more of those turquoise colors, and that is still considered green. Where this is an advantage is that for the most part, all of our weeds are green. You know, there are some cases, you know, where, you know, you might have like a red root pigweed or something like that that has a red stem. There are some other situations in other parts of the world where, you know, we have weeds that are different colors. But what we can say with confidence is that as long as it falls within this green spectrum, it's going to get sprayed. Where it's a bad thing is that in certain conditions, so specifically here, like I mentioned before with yellow, we can run into situations with things like residue, where in certain lighting conditions, it will actually look yellow. So what will happen in that scenario is that we will start to get some false triggering. So if we don't have like a truly black background like soil, you know, with that golden stubble, that looks yellow to the camera, so it will actually start spraying and it will falsely trigger in those scenarios. So that is one limitation of the system today, is that, you know, we in these situations specifically need to apply filters to the camera to get sort of this spectrum of green and red out in those specific conditions. So yeah, with the Select system, you know, very versatile. It can work in many different conditions, but there are some limitations just because it is solely based on color. Okay, the next system that I will talk about is the system we're using for See and Spray Premium and Ultimate. So I'm going to draw a couple pictures here. And who can tell me what the difference between these two images is? Exactly. How did you know? Because it looks that way? Perfect. Okay, what's the difference between this and this? Can't tell. What if I told you this is wheat and this is a wild oat? I'm being facetious, but yeah. One day, we'll get there. So this is how the See and Spray Ultimate and Premium model works. So what we're basically doing is it's like training a child. And the comparison that I quite frequently make is like when you're training a kid, the difference between a cat and a dog. You know, cats have pointy ears. Dogs have, you know, usually long ears, a longer snout. You know, cat has shorter nose. You know, the kid eventually understands that this is what a cat looks like and this is what a dog looks like. And the Premium and Ultimate systems are very similar in that we train them to know really well what the target crop looks like. So like today, I mentioned corn. We train it to know really well what corn looks like at all different growth stages, so that we're able to go in and we can segment out everything that is corn and everything else is considered a weed. So we employ that same methodology in all the crops that we have registered today. So the biggest limitation with that, well, sorry, I should start with the main advantage of having that is that we are no longer you know, restricted by just the color green. We're looking at shape, we're looking at color, we're looking at texture. So we can start to do like the in-crop applications, like the green on green. And that's obviously the main advantage to that. The main disadvantage is that in order to train these models, it takes a ton of time and it takes a ton of money. And the way that we do it is we actually hire a bunch of interns every summer, and they strap on a backpack that has, you know, the Ultimate camera, the Ultimate computer on it, and they walk through the fields in all different directions, and they capture at different heights, you know, trying to simulate what a sprayer boom is going to do throughout the field. And then they send all these images back to the Blue River group that I talked about earlier. And then we actually have somebody physically go in and label everything that's within the image. And then we feed that into the model, and eventually it starts to learn this is corn and this is a weed. So you know, very, very, you know, powerful with what we can do with that, but it is a considerable amount of time and money. And when we compare it to something like Select that is only looking for green, you know, you can see that there's a big difference in the versatility of the two systems.
So is it doing that just through the image, or is it using some sort of like NIR camera?
So yeah, I will get into that a little bit, but I do have the two different cameras from the two different systems here. You can see that, you know, you physically can't really see a difference between them. So this is the Select camera. So this is just a regular RGB camera, like just like on your phone. Any pictures that you take are RGB. With the Ultimate system, we actually use a near infrared green and red camera. So it is able to identify like specific plant chlorophyll and calculate and understand that these are actually plants that are growing versus this is something that's just green. So, great question. Okay, so I think the next thing I'm going to talk about is just the different hardware on the system. So I'll start with See & Spray Select just because it's the machine that's behind me here. So this is just a regular John Deere sprayer, like this is a 410R. You can order this sprayer today. There's nothing really special about it other than the hardware that we have added for See & Spray. So what we have different from just a regular sprayer is we do have what we call the IPMs, or the image processing module. So there's 5 of them across the boom. And each of them is hooked up to 8 cameras, with the exception of the middle one only has 6. And what these are doing is they are responsible for all of the processing that happens on the back end. So if you've been in a piece of equipment, you know, rather recently, you might, you know, find that the displays that we currently have, it feels like compared to an iPad or something like that, it's like something from like 2010. So just rest assured that we are doing most of the processing off-board on these different IPMs. And then at that point, the display is really just becoming a monitor, just like your computer, right? So what happens when we detect a weed, or sorry, so you might be wondering where the cameras are. So there's 36 of them across the boom. So there's one here, you can see them with each of the connectors. So yeah, there's 36 of them across the boom, and each of them is responsible for 3 nozzles. So we basically have an image that the cameras are looking at. There's a region of interest where we're actually looking for the weeds and everything else, and then that is split into 3. And if there's a weed that shows up, say over here, this is the nozzle that we turn on to spray that weed. If the weed ends up here, then we turn on this nozzle and this nozzle to make sure that we get overlap and we spray the weed with both nozzles. So, okay. So yes, 36 cameras across the boom. Yeah, and then when it detects a weed, it is sending just the nozzle command to the nozzle controller, and then that nozzle turns on. And then we are able to set up, you know, certain amounts of buffer. So with the Select machine, we can turn on 1 nozzle if 1 nozzle is all we think we need in order to kill that weed, but we can turn on as much as 3, so that if we even see a small weed, 3 nozzles will turn on to hit that 1 single weed. So it is different between the Select and the Ultimate machine. I believe on the Select, it is looking roughly 3 feet ahead. So you might be wondering how we can do that so quickly. Well, part of the reason is, so with the original See & Spray Select machine, our maximum speed was only 12 miles per hour. Now we have these rear inverted nozzles, so you'll notice them on my sprayer all facing backward. And these give it that extra little bit of a fraction of a second, and we're able to actually spray at 16 miles per hour now. So, you know, we're able to ramp that up pretty significantly with those rearward facing nozzles. So, but from the time that the camera actually triggers the master nozzle controller to turn that nozzle on, it's actually not a limitation of, you know, how far ahead and how fast that, you know, decision to spray actually happens. It's actually more of a factor of the nozzle turning on and actually making a proper spray pattern that we're more worried about. It's not the processing power on the front side.
So can it be made so that, say you put on a baseline, say when you're doing burn off, you put it on like a base rate, and when it sees a patch in that area, put on more?
Yes, but always follow label directions. So yeah, we can do that. So the question was, can we spray a rate? So on the to back up a little bit, on the John Deere system, we can actually spray with 2 nozzles at the same time. We call them A and B. So on the A side, we would be broadcasting the product, and then when we see a weed patch, we can tell the system to turn the B nozzle on and then kind of give it a boost rate in those scenarios. But it is something like that we have explored, but you know, again, it just comes back to labels, like and ensuring that we actually have a label range in order to do that. You know, we do see growers using the technology that way, though, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so Mitch, do you want to hop in the cab? And we're going to do a quick demo here. So I promise I rinse the sprayer out like 5 or 6 times. We're just spraying water. We are able to just kind of walk behind it and see everything working. While we wait for Mitch to kind of boot everything up, it does take a minute or two for that to happen. Is there any other questions that I can answer right now? Cost? So on the See and Spray Select machine, it's obviously, you know, your base sprayer plus about 150,000 Canadian. So, you know, the use case in Western Canada, you know, obviously with it, you know, being only for pre-seed or post-harvest application right now, it does take a little bit longer for that payback to happen, for sure. You know, we see growers going in excess in some cases, you know, of 90% savings. Well, you know, with your no crop scenarios, you know, the products in those situations, like your glyphosate and you know, you maybe have a tank mix partner in there, it can take a little bit longer for payback in Western Canada, but we are working on some additional features beyond just the pre-seed and post-harvest burn-off that is going to add a ton more value to the system. Yeah. Anything else? Any other questions? Yep.
So is dust an issue on those camera lenses?
So the question is dust an issue? So dust is an issue, but only from the perspective of if your tires are kicking up dust. So in those situations, we actually go into what's called fallback mode, where if the camera is operating in conditions where we think it would not be able to see a weed, or if the boom gets too high, or if the boom is moving too fast, we do put the sprayer into sort of a default broadcast mode where any of those nozzles that are affected by dust will go into a full broadcast mode. So, and I think your question was more specifically around, you know, dust on the nozzles. Or sorry, dust on the cameras. Yeah, so on the lens itself, you know, I'm actually surprised myself that isn't an issue that we run into. We do run into issues like with mud clumps and things like that stick to the lens, specifically with the cameras that are behind the tires. But as far as dust goes, we have more issues with the like active dust that has been, you know, brought up by the tires more so than on the lenses themselves. And I do recommend every morning just wiping down the lenses. So, yep. Yep.
And can you just add it to an existing sprayer, or does it have to come in a package?
Yeah, so the question was, how much is the Ultimate? So the Ultimate machine is, like some of the features of that machine, it's got, you know, a carbon fiber boom, truss style boom, and it also has a dual tank solution. So part of the reason for that carbon fiber boom and the reduced weight is yeah, we needed that carbon fiber boom just to carry the extra weight. Yeah, that system is anywhere from I believe it's 150,000 US to 175,000 US. The reason that it is very close to the same price as Select is because it does come with a subscription model. So when you're using the Ultimate or the premium models, there is a per acre charge for that, versus with Select, it is just purchase the hardware and it's unlimited use.
You said the Select was 150 Canadian, right? Or was that
That's correct. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing. Yeah, so like the Ultimate, obviously you're getting the boom and the dual tank system, so they're like from a hardware perspective, you're getting more. But yeah, the models that are employed on premium and Ultimate are, yeah. And I think your other question is, can you upgrade? So it's not possible to upgrade today. You can upgrade to a See and Spray Premium, which uses a very similar boom and structure to this, with the main limitation being it doesn't have the dual tank, and it is limited to 12 mile per hour just because the boom stability on the carbon fiber boom is quite a bit better.
So that's upgrading from the Select to the Premium?
No, we don't offer an upgrade from Select to Premium today, but we do offer, like, if you just had a regular sprayer, you would be able to upgrade to a Premium. So, yeah. Okay, so he should be ready to go here.
What's the speed limit?
On which system?
Select.
On Select, it's 16 mile per hour, and on Ultimate, it's 15 mile per hour. Yeah. Are you ready to go, Mitch?
Yep.
Okay. So we can walk behind the sprayer. Just be conscious. You know, it is a big piece of equipment. So we'll just walk out with it here. Okay. So I guess I'll just ask a question of the group here real quick. Who has actually used, you know, some sort of targeted broadcast solution in the past, you know, whether it's a deer system or a weed it or, and can you tell me a little bit about your experience? Is it something that you demoed or that you have on your farm right now, or I'm just curious?
We went into it just strict, I guess, for savings and I guess perception from city people.
He's a
that
weed it.
We have a weeded system, yeah, and that, you know, we're doing our best to not broadcast or dump chemical just wherever willy-nilly.
So what's the ROI that you're seeing?
Well, I was just telling these guys, for us, we're saving, you know, probably $40,000 on a 5,000 acre farm per year. So return on 4-year payback, 3 to 4 years. So
I've used Green Eye.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, so obviously I work for Deere. I'm biased towards our technology, but I'm a big advocate just for targeted broadcast in general. I really do feel that this is kind of the next auto track. As we start to see more farmers start to adopt it and start to use it and understand how they're going to use it, it's really going to change, you know, how we spray. You know, there's tons of opportunities. The ones that I like to talk about, so let me back up just for a moment here. So, you know, our focus in our marketing and our messaging has been, you know, focused a lot on cost savings. You know, obviously it's very easy for the grower to look and say, hey, I'm saving X amount of dollars per acre and be really happy with themselves. And that's absolutely a selling point. And, you know, we you know, obviously we need to have that sort of information in the marketing material for it to pay back for the farmer. But as an agronomist, I like to think about it from the perspective of we're achieving better agronomic outcomes. So today, like the system is, you know, very limited, I would say, compared to what the future capabilities are going to hold. You know, we're able to spray, you know, weeds in you know, a fallow situation or in a crop situation. You know, that's great. But I start looking towards the future where, you know, I think about it from like the 4R perspective with nutrients, right? We have, you know, the right formulation. So, you know, what could we potentially do with the system if we had like a dual tank solution on the Ultimate? You know, could we start to apply specific herbicides to specific weeds? Could we apply, you know, a specific herbicide active to a very large weed and a different rate to a smaller weed? Like there's just a ton of opportunity there in terms of, you know, applying the right formulation and, you know, we've had discussions with, you know, the big 4 chem companies, and it's like, you know, they might have some products on the back shelf that they haven't commercialized because it's too expensive to manufacture. Well, now if you're only spraying 10% of the field, now it's a lot more economical to bring things like that forward to combat things like herbicide resistance and understanding what we can do with that. The next,
What about like fungicide and fertilizer and stuff? Kind of like the old green seeker.
yeah, so you know, definitely something that we're looking into. There's nothing commercial today, but stay tuned. That's all I can say. So
That would probably need the NIR
not necessarily. Yeah. So yeah, formulation is the first R, or yeah, right formulation. Right rate, I talked about that a little bit already. You know, can we not spot spray, targeted broadcast weeds that are larger with a better rate for better control? You know, there was a really good discussion this morning. I believe it was Nolan that, you know, we were talking about, you know, getting that right rate on that weed size. You know, that you know, can definitely be applied to like foliar herbicide, right? Yeah, just getting better coverage, using more water volume, and, you know, controlling those harder to control weeds. In terms of placement, so you know, obviously with targeted broadcast, we are targeting the areas that need to be sprayed. On the Ultimate machine, we do generate weed pressure maps that tell you in your field, you know, how much weed pressure was in a specific area. So what could you potentially use that information for? Well, again, you know, for patch spraying or controlling those areas differently. Maybe you need a different active herbicide in those areas to make sure that you're controlling those problem weeds and making sure that you're suppressing them and making them smaller and not larger. Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Are they identifying the grassies from the broadleaf yet? Separate so you can tank mix on the fly or whatever?
Not today. So this is a little bit forward-looking and just kind of my, you know, insight into what I think the future could hold. So, yeah, you do bring up a good point though. So one thing I didn't mention is, you know, I talked before about corn, soybeans, and cotton being the models that we have available on See and Spray Ultimate today. Obviously, we don't have any small grains crops in there, and there's a good reason for that. It's because small grains is much harder to do. So with wheat in particular, you know, if we go back to my example where I drew what I said was a wheat plant and a wild oat plant, well, how do you identify the difference between the two? You know, using traditional machine learning methods, it's very difficult. You can use things like, you know, different crop stages to maybe identify like what is the crop and what is a weed, but, you know, that's not going to work every single time. And you know, if I told you that, hey, when I go and use my See and Spray Ultimate, I'm only going to get an 80% hit rate on my wild oats, you're not going to use it, right? So, you know, there's a lot of different challenges like that. Another big one is, you know, how do you spray volunteer canola in canola? You know, again, using crop stage or something like that, maybe there's something possible, but right now today we're limited with what we can actually do with that technology. So, yeah. The last thing, so the last 4R is timing. So we know from data that we have within Deere that our machines are actually spray on and actually spraying a field only about 40% of the time. The other 60% is time spent filling, is time spent transporting, potentially time spent fixing the machine. You know, so that 40 versus 60, you know, when you're utilizing, you know, a very expensive asset like that in a very efficient way, we know that we can do better. So when we're using targeted broadcast, I sprayed about 6,000 acres last season with the See and Spray Ultimate machine, and you know, my average savings across all the fields was about 75%. So if you think about, I'm only spraying 25% of my field. Think about how many additional acres that you can spray with that one single tank. Like you can go out, you can probably, instead of hitting 1 quarter, you can now hit 4 or 5. Way less time filling, more time spraying. So that also opens the door to you know, things like, you know, do I need to do an additional pass somewhere, or do I need to do a better job controlling in this one field versus another? It really opens up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities that way. the last topic that I'm going to cover, and I'm really glad that you brought up, the sustainability and environmental piece, because, that is something that I think that we're potentially overlooking as an industry right now. Like, if you think about the example I constantly bring up is the fact that we can't really pre-harvest our oats anymore because, grain millers aren't accepting them. So, we've basically reverted back to swathing. Well, the same sort of situation has come up for other cereals, for wheat and for barley and things like that. And, obviously maltsters, we can't spray pre-harvest glyphosate on anything for malt. So, you need to think ahead to, what can this technology do to help the agriculture industry in general just be perceived as better from that public perception. So, the big scary word that I don't like to use, but we have to talk about is policy. So, what does the future hold for agriculture? Is a system like this going to be mandatory in the future? Like those are all things that we need to maybe consider. And just wanted to kind of put in your minds as you leave here today. It's not all bad news though, because we could potentially see better marketing opportunities, grain premiums, things like that for crops that have been applied with this technology, just because of the fact that the public wants safer and better food quality. So with that, that kind of concludes everything that I had to talk about today. Is there any additional questions? I'm open to kind of anything. Go ahead.
So you touched on policy a little bit, and you
Yep.
also touched on, right rate, adjusting rate, and all that
Yep.
stuff. So if history repeats here, I'm thinking about, say, drone application. The
Okay.
regulatory environment isn't going to keep up to the technology. So has Deere been having any of those proactive conversations with the PMRA or the EPA, around, say, max use rates per season using this technology versus broadcast? Is there a way that we can keep regulatory keeping up with technology?
That's an excellent question, and the way I'll respond to that is that Deere doesn't own labels for any product, right? And so what we've been doing is we've been approaching industry more so than directly with the PM. Like we definitely talk with, say, the PMRA and the EPA. We keep an active line with them and let them know what we're doing. And everything that is on See and Spray today has been approved at some level with those different entities. But we really look towards the label owners to kind of take that on our behalf. As long as they support their product going through a See and Spray unit, then we kind of leave it on them to have those discussions on do we need to potentially amend some labels and things like that. Just because, like I said, we don't own any of those labels, so we don't think it's appropriate for us to be doing that work on it would be weird if John Deere went and tried to change label rates for like pre-harvested wheat or something like that, right? So, great question though. Yep.
So back in the 80s, there was some somewhat similar technology around. I remember seeing a demo sort of like this. So what went wrong, or why did that technology never take off?
My opinion would be that like the hardware has come a significant ways since then. So where we were limited by things like speed before, that's not an issue anymore because we have the computing power. Even things like improved boom track and boom stability. Like we know that with the Ultimate Machine, we designed that boom specifically for boom stability because we need that in order for the cameras to be able to see the weeds and act on it accordingly. If you have a boom that's going like a floppy noodle, right? It's just not going to work properly, and you're not going to get the results that you need. So I would say that it's just the technology has now come to the point where we're finally able to do this and do it on large scale. And yeah, that's all I can say. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Have you learned anything that you didn't think that you were going to learn over the course of launching See and Spray to now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually surprised that this question didn't come up. The one that I get asked all the time is, how do I know how much to mix up? And initially we had a lot of reservations about that. We've looked at things like scouting the field first with a drone, trying to figure out like how much area we're actually going to cover with the See and Spray unit. And what we've actually learned over time is really interesting, is that you kind of get a gut feel for how much you're going to mix up. And then as you spray other fields, you start to learn, these are my weedier fields, these are my less weedier fields. So you start to learn, like, this is how much I should mix up for any given field. The other strategy that a lot of our growers use is usually when they're going out to spray, they're spraying more than one field. So they load up, they spray until they kind of get to that last field, and then they'll just broadcast out the remainder so that they don't have any product left over. And I'm not sure if you have anything to add there, but that's, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's just one thing that keeps coming up. Like anybody that's never used or seen the technology before is like, how do I mix up, So, and I'm not saying it isn't a challenge, because it still definitely exists. It's just maybe not as big of a deal as we initially thought it was going to be. Going once, twice. Awesome. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.